caught my boyfriend cheating through his smart home camera while I was in the hospital. Never in my darkest nightmares did I imagine that the smart home camera meant to keep me safe would become the window to my worst heartbreak. My name is Madison, and at 28 years old, I thought my life was finally falling into perfect place. I had a promising career as a graphic designer, a beautiful apartment overlooking the city skyline, and a boyfriend who seemed to be everything I had ever dreamed of. His name was Lucas, and we had been together for 3 years, living together in our downtown apartment for the last 2. Lucas was charming, successful, and incredibly thoughtful, or so I believed. It was his idea to install the smart home cameras throughout our apartment, claiming it would make me feel safer when he traveled for work. Little did I know that these very cameras would later become the witnesses to my heart's destruction. 3 weeks ago, everything changed in an instant. A rainy Tuesday evening, I was driving home from a client meeting when a truck ran a red light, slamming into the driver's side of my car. The last thing I remembered before waking up in the hospital was the screeching of tires and the sound of shattering glass. The doctors told me I was lucky to be alive. My injuries were severe but not life-threatening. A broken arm, 3 fractured ribs, and a concussion that left me with dizzy spells and blurred vision. Lucas had been by my side constantly in those first days, sleeping in the uncomfortable hospital chair, bringing me homemade soup, and reassuring me that everything would be okay. His devotion during those initial hospital days made me fall even more in love with him, if that was even possible. After 10 days in the hospital, I was transferred to a rehabilitation facility to continue my recovery. The doctors were pleased with my progress, but I still needed another 2 weeks of physical therapy before I could return home. Lucas visited every evening after work, bringing flowers, books, and updates from our apartment building. He seemed to be the perfect supportive boyfriend, handling everything at home while I focused on healing. He even coordinated with my boss to ensure my job would be waiting for me when I recovered. On the 14th day of my hospital stay, Lucas arrived looking particularly handsome in his tailored suit, having come directly from an important business meeting. He kissed my forehead, adjusted my pillows, and told me he had to work late that evening but would call me before bed. As he left, I felt that familiar warmth in my chest, the comfort of knowing I had someone so caring and reliable in my life. That evening, as I lay in my hospital bed watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, I remembered the smart home app on my phone. Lucas had installed it so I could check on our cat, Mochi, whenever I felt homesick. I hadn't opened it since the accident, but tonight I suddenly felt a strong urge to see our apartment, to feel connected to the life that was waiting for me. With my good hand, I navigated to the app and selected the living room camera feed. The screen loaded slowly, and when the image finally appeared, my heart stopped. There was Lucas standing in our living room, but he wasn't alone. A woman with long dark hair was standing close to him, much too close for comfort, her hand resting on his arm as she laughed at something he had said. I watched in disbelief as Lucas leaned in and kissed her, first gently, then with increasing passion. My hand trembled as I gripped the phone, the pain in my chest suddenly having nothing to do with my broken ribs. The world seemed to tilt on its axis as I stared at the small screen, unable to process what I was seeing. This couldn't be happening. Not Lucas. Not my Lucas.
The same man who had held my hand through every painful procedure, who had cried when he first saw me in the hospital bed covered in tubes and bandages. I tried to rationalize what I was witnessing. Maybe it was his sister? No, I had met his sister, and this woman wasn't her. Maybe it was a work colleague? But the way he was touching her, the way she was leaning into him with such familiarity, went far beyond professional boundaries. My mind raced, searching for an explanation that wouldn't shatter my reality completely. I switched to the audio feed, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone. Their voices filled my hospital room, clear as if they were standing right beside me. I heard Lucas say something about how he had missed her, how difficult it had been pretending everything was normal while I was in the hospital. The woman, whose name I would soon learn was Natasha, replied that she understood, that she had been patient, but she was tired of sharing him, even if the other person was laid up in a hospital bed. Her words were like knives, each one twisting deeper into my already wounded heart. I watched as Lucas led her to our sofa, the same sofa where we had spent countless evenings watching movies, where he had comforted me when I was stressed about work, where we had planned our future together. As they settled onto the sofa, Lucas's arm wrapped around Natasha's shoulders, I felt physically ill. My broken ribs throbbed with pain, or perhaps it was just my heart breaking. I considered turning off the feed, pretending I had never seen this, but I couldn't look away. It was as if I was hypnotized by the horror unfolding on my screen. They talked about their day, about people I didn't know, about plans they had made without my knowledge. Then Natasha mentioned a weekend trip they had taken to the mountains while I was supposedly visiting my parents last month. Suddenly, all the inconsistencies in Lucas's story started to make sense. The times he had been working late, the business trips that couldn't be verified, the mysterious charges on our credit card that he had explained away as work expenses. I had been so blind, so trusting, so utterly foolish. The worst part was seeing the ease and comfort between them, the natural intimacy that can only develop over time. This wasn't a new thing. This wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness. This was a relationship that had been growing in the shadows while I was living in what I thought was a loving partnership. I watched as Lucas got up to pour them wine, using the glasses we had bought together on our anniversary. He knew exactly how Natasha liked her wine, the same way I liked mine. Every detail was a fresh betrayal, a new layer to the deception that had been my life for who knows how long. As they toasted to their future, I finally found the strength to switch off the feed, my tears flowing freely now, hot and silent on my cheeks. The silence in my hospital room was deafening after I disconnected from the camera feed. My mind was reeling, trying to process the enormity of what I had just witnessed. How long had this been going on? Months? Years? Had our entire relationship been a lie? I thought back to all the red flags I ignored, the small inconsistencies that I had brushed aside because I trusted Lucas completely. The time he had forgotten our 2-year anniversary, but made it up to me with an extravagant weekend getaway. The business conference in Hawaii he had attended alone, though his company usually sent teams to such events. The late nights at the office that coincided with nights when I was working late myself, leaving us with little quality time together. I had been living in a carefully constructed illusion, and tonight,
the curtain had been pulled back to reveal the ugly truth behind it. My first instinct was to call Lucas, to scream at him, to demand answers. But as I reached for my phone, I stopped myself. What good would it do? He would likely deny everything, gaslight me into believing I was mistaken or overreacting. And I was in no physical condition to handle that kind of emotional confrontation. Instead, I decided to keep watching. I needed to know the full extent of his betrayal, to understand how deep the deception went. With a sense of dread mixed with a strange determination, I reconnected to the camera feed. They had moved from the living room to the kitchen, where Lucas was preparing dinner for Natasha. I watched as he moved around our kitchen with practiced ease, pulling out ingredients I didn't even know we had. He knew exactly how she liked her steak cooked, which vegetables she preferred, how much seasoning to use. These were intimate details that spoke of shared time and experiences, moments that should have been ours but had been stolen by this other woman. As they ate at our dining table, laughing and touching each other's hands across the candlelit space, I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I was watching a movie about someone else's life. The pain was still there, sharp and suffocating, but beneath it, a cold resolve was forming. After dinner, they moved to the bedroom, our bedroom, where Lucas and I had shared our most private moments, where we had dreamed about our future, where we had made love countless times. I almost couldn't watch as they entered the room, but I forced myself to continue. I needed to see this, to let the reality of his betrayal sink in completely. They didn't immediately get physical. Instead, they lay on the bed talking, their voices softer now, more intimate. That's when I heard Lucas say the words that would forever be etched in my memory. "I'm going to break up with her as soon as she's out of the hospital. I promise. I just don't want to add to her stress while she's recovering." Natasha's response was chilling in its casual cruelty. "You've been saying that for months, Lucas. Maybe you're too comfortable with your little nursemaid routine. Maybe you like having two women to take care of your needs." Lucas's reassurances that I was just a habit he was ready to break, that Natasha was the one he truly loved, should have devastated me. But instead, they clarified everything. He wasn't just cheating, he was planning his exit strategy, waiting for the right time to end things with me. The realization that he had been nursing me back to health while simultaneously planning our future breakup was almost more than I could bear. I watched as he silenced her doubts with kisses, as their clothes came off, as they made love in the bed where he had promised me forever. And through it all, I remained strangely calm, the tears having dried, replaced by a cold clarity that shocked even myself. The night stretched on endlessly as I continued to watch them through the camera feed. After their intimate moment in our bedroom, they fell asleep in each other's arms, looking peaceful and content, while I lay in my hospital bed, my mind racing with plans and possibilities. The initial shock had given way to a steely determination. I wasn't going to be the victim in this story. I wasn't going to let Lucas's betrayal define me or break me. I had survived a car accident that could have taken my life. I could certainly survive this heartbreak. I watched as he silenced her doubts with kisses, as their clothes came off, as they made love in the bed where he had promised me forever. And through it all, I remained strangely calm, the tears having dried, replaced by a cold clarity that shocked even myself. The night stretched on endlessly as I continued to watch them through the camera feed. After their intimate moment in our bedroom, they fell asleep in each other's arms, looking peaceful and content, while I lay in my hospital bed, my mind racing with plans and possibilities. The initial shock had given way to a steely determination. I wasn't going to be the victim in this story. I wasn't going to let Lucas's betrayal define me or break me. I had survived a car accident that could have taken my life. I could certainly survive this heartbreak. As the first light of dawn filtered through my hospital window, I saw Lucas stir and gently disentangle himself from Natasha's sleeping form. He moved quietly around the bedroom, gathering his clothes and dressing in the bathroom. I watched as he wrote a note and left it on the nightstand, then leaned down to kiss Natasha's forehead before leaving the room. A few minutes later, I saw him exit our apartment, dressed for work in his usual business attire, looking every bit the devoted boyfriend who would soon be visiting me in the hospital. The transformation was seamless, chilling in its perfection. He had played this role so many times that it had become second nature to him. My phone buzzed with a text message from Lucas. "Morning, beautiful. Thinking of you. Can't wait to see you tonight. I've got some exciting news to share." The irony was almost laughable. The exciting news, I presumed, was that he was finally going to break up with me, though he had no idea that I already knew. I didn't respond immediately, instead formulating a plan. I needed evidence, not just for myself, but to ensure that Lucas couldn't twist the narrative later. I spent the next hour taking screenshots of the camera footage, carefully documenting every intimate moment, every conversation that exposed their relationship. I backed up everything to a cloud storage account, then deleted the evidence from my phone, knowing Lucas might check it when he visited. The hospital day passed in a blur of physical therapy sessions, medical checkups, and forced conversations with nurses who had no idea of the emotional storm raging inside me. Throughout it all, I maintained a calm exterior, smiling when appropriate, responding to questions about my recovery with optimistic answers. Inside, however, I was strategizing, planning my next moves. I decided not to confront Lucas immediately. I needed to get out of the hospital first, to be on equal footing when the confrontation happened. I also needed time to process my emotions and decide what I wanted from the aftermath: revenge, justice, or simply the freedom to move on without looking back. When Lucas arrived that evening, he was carrying a beautiful bouquet of my favorite flowers, peonies, just like the ones in our first apartment. He looked tired but happy, kissing me with an enthusiasm that would have melted my heart just yesterday. Today, however, it only confirmed what a skilled actor he was. He sat by my bed, holding my hand and telling me about his day, carefully omitting any mention of Natasha or their night together. He mentioned the exciting news from his text message, explaining that he had been offered a promotion that would require us to move to a new city in a few months. I listened with an expression of interest and excitement, while internally noting how this fit perfectly with his plan to phase me out of his life. The move would have been the perfect excuse to end things, allowing him to play the victim who had to choose between his career and his relationship. As he talked about our supposed future together, I found myself marveling at his audacity, his complete lack of remorse or guilt. It was then that I realized the depth of his deception and the strength I would need to navigate the days ahead. The following days were a masterclass in emotional control as I continued to play the part of the loving, grateful girlfriend. Each evening, Lucas would arrive with flowers, gifts, or my favorite takeout, his performance flawless in its devotion. He would update me on his day, carefully crafting stories that excluded any mention of Natasha, while I would nod and smile, asking appropriate questions, all the while knowing that each night he would return to her. I had started checking the camera feeds regularly, not out of masochism, but to gather information. I learned Natasha's last name, where she worked, and that she lived in the same apartment building, just 3 floors below us. I discovered that Lucas had been paying her rent for the past 6 months, and that they had taken several trips together, all disguised as business obligations. Each piece of information was like a puzzle piece, slowly revealing the full picture of his betrayal. My physical recovery progressed well, and the doctors were pleased with my improvement. I pushed myself harder in physical therapy, motivated by a desire to get out of the hospital and reclaim my life. The pain in my ribs had subsided to a dull ache, and my broken arm was healing nicely. The concussion symptoms had mostly resolved, though I still experienced occasional dizzy spells. During my sessions with the hospital psychologist, who was assigned to help patients cope with trauma, I found myself opening up about the accident, but remaining silent about Lucas's betrayal. I knew that discussing it would inevitably lead to tears or anger, emotions I couldn't afford to reveal yet. Instead, I focused on processing the physical and emotional trauma of the accident, channeling all my energy into healing my body while carefully guarding my heart. One evening, as Lucas was leaving after his visit, he mentioned that he needed to travel to Chicago for a business conference the following week. He expressed concern about leaving me alone, suggesting that perhaps I could move to a short-term care facility where I would have round-the-clock attention. I saw the opportunity immediately and agreed, suggesting that it would give me peace of mind knowing he could focus on his conference without worrying about me. He looked relieved, which only confirmed my suspicions that the conference was likely a getaway with Natasha. The next day, I spoke with my doctor about transferring to a short-term rehabilitation facility, explaining that I wanted to be closer to home and that I felt ready for more intensive therapy. Within 48 hours, the arrangements were made, and I was scheduled to be discharged in 3 days. With my discharge date set, I began making preparations for what would come next. I contacted a lawyer recommended by a colleague, explaining that I needed advice on tenant rights and property division, carefully framing it as a precautionary measure. I also reached out to my best friend, Olivia, who had been traveling for work and was unaware of what had happened. I didn't reveal everything, but I asked if I could stay with her for a while after leaving the hospital, explaining that I needed some time to myself before returning to the apartment. Olivia, always supportive, immediately agreed, offering me her guest room for as long as I needed it. On my last night in the hospital, I packed my belongings, leaving out only what I would need for the next few days. I took one last look at the camera feed, where Lucas and Natasha were having dinner in our apartment, their laughter echoing in my quiet hospital room. I switched off the feed with a sense of finality, knowing that the next time I saw Lucas face to face, everything would be different. The morning of my discharge from the hospital arrived with a sense of nervous anticipation. Lucas had offered to pick me up, but I had politely declined, explaining that Olivia was already on her way and that we had plans to celebrate my release with a girls' day. He seemed disappointed but understanding, kissing me goodbye the previous evening with a promise to see me soon. As I waited for Olivia in the hospital lobby, my discharge papers signed and my small bag packed, I felt a mixture of fear and excitement. The past weeks had been a surreal journey of discovery and emotional turmoil, but now it was time to reclaim my life on my own terms. Olivia arrived right on time, her presence immediately calming my frayed nerves. As we drove away from the hospital, I finally broke down, telling her everything that had happened. She listened with growing outrage, offering comfort and support and agreeing to help me with whatever came next. We spent the day at her apartment, me unpacking and settling into the guest room, her making calls to secure a locksmith and a moving company for the following day. We decided that I would return to the apartment when Lucas was at work, accompanied by two of Olivia's brothers who would provide support and help me move my belongings. The plan was to be in and out quickly, leaving only a letter and the evidence of his betrayal behind. The next morning, with the spare key I had never returned after the accident, I let myself into the apartment. The space that had once been my sanctuary now felt alien and contaminated. I could see traces of Natasha everywhere, a coffee mug I didn't recognize, a throw pillow that wasn't mine, a faint scent of perfume that wasn't my own. With Olivia's brothers helping, I quickly packed my personal belongings, focusing only on what was truly mine. As I worked, I found more evidence of Lucas's double life. A receipt for 2 plane tickets to Paris, a box containing a necklace I had never seen, and even a framed photo of Lucas and Natasha hidden in the back of his closet. Each discovery was like another stab to the heart, but I remained focused on the task at hand, determined not to let emotions derail my plan. Before leaving, I took one last walk through the apartment, saying goodbye to the life I had thought I had. In the center of the kitchen counter, I left a thick envelope containing the screenshots and evidence of his affair, along with a letter I had written the night before. In the letter, I didn't pour out my anger or hurt. Instead, I calmly stated that I knew everything, that I was leaving, and that I would be in touch through my lawyer regarding the division of assets and the termination of our lease. I ended with a simple sentence: I hope she was worth it. As I locked the door behind me, sliding the key through the mail slot, I felt an unexpected sense of relief, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity as I rebuilt my life. I found a new apartment, smaller but brighter, with a view of the park instead of the city skyline. I threw myself into my work, taking on new projects that challenged me creatively and kept my mind occupied. Lucas tried to contact me multiple times, calls, texts, even showing up at my office, but I remained firm in my decision to have no direct contact. His messages ranged from angry accusations to desperate apologies, but I never responded, letting my lawyer handle all communication. Through my lawyer, I learned that Natasha had ended things with Lucas after discovering my letter and the evidence, leaving him alone in the apartment we had once shared. The irony wasn't lost on me. He had lost both of us in his quest to have both. 6 months after my discharge from the hospital, I ran into Lucas at a coffee shop near my new apartment. He looked tired and thinner, the confident charm replaced by a tentative vulnerability. We exchanged awkward pleasantries, and he apologized again, more sincerely this time. I accepted his apology not because I forgave him, but because I no longer needed his remorse to move forward. As I walked away from that encounter, I felt not bitterness, but gratitude for the painful journey that had led me here. The car accident had nearly taken my life, but in a strange way, the discovery of Lucas's betrayal had saved it, forcing me to reevaluate what I wanted and needed, ultimately leading me to a stronger, more authentic version of myself. The smart home cameras that had revealed his deception were now installed in my new apartment, not as tools of suspicion, but as symbols of my survival and resilience. Reminders that even in our darkest moments, we have the strength to rebuild and start anew.